everyone. Thank you for coming down here today and spending your evening with us. So my name is Chloe, and today I'll be your host. So for those of you who are still queuing up with food, that's okay. You can bring your food to the table and join us whenever you're ready. So this is the very first evening of our entire week of events. Today we have with us here Peter Vandenbroek. Peter, please. So Peter is from an organization called Friends International, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more about Friends International?
Yes, so my job is to go around to different universities and speak about the Christian faith to international students. So I have a great job. I enjoy it very much. I've been doing it for 20 years.
Nice, very nice. And as an international student myself, I'm very glad to hear that you are working with so many others. So Peter, just before you start your talk, maybe you can tell us what is the strangest food you have ever eaten.
Okay. So my wife was an international student. She was from Singapore. We met as undergraduates at Liverpool University, somewhere just after the last ice age. During our first year, we kind of got to know each other and started dating. And then her family in Singapore started to hear about this boy called Peter. So they decided to invite me for the whole summer. Now, if you go and visit your girlfriend's parents for dinner, that's a big deal. This was 11 weeks on the other side of the world. And on the very first night, as a 20-year-old student, I met her parents, and they welcomed me into their home. And dinner was sea cucumber stew, sea slug stew. Which are sea slugs or sea cucumbers are kind of animals that feed on the bottom of the ocean. And apparently, they are edible. And years later, I asked my mother-in-law, but I really recognize we don't normally eat those things. And she said, yes, I was just testing you. She wanted to know that her daughter wouldn't be having fish and chips for life.
Nice story. Reminds me a lot of Crazy Rich Asians.
Yeah,
movie.
actually, that's quite similar to.
Yeah. So without further ado, Peter, you can take it away.
Okay, thank you. I'm actually going to stand down here, if that's all right. So, I live and work in Oxford, and when I'm not travelling, and I've got 3 children: Sam, who's 23. Laura, who is 21, and Madeline, who's 21, and they, 17, and they very much enjoy being from a family of 2 different cultures. In fact, I often say that my life you could divide into 2, the potato eating years and the rice eating years. And really, for the first 18, 19 years of my life, the potato eating years, was brought up in a very, very English, very middle-class, white area just south of Manchester. And I had 0 experience of other cultures and other religions. But then after I went to university, my next-door neighbor was from Sri Lanka. He was a Hindu. And then, obviously, I met my wife, who's a Christian from Singapore. And between us, we had lots of friends who are from different countries around Asia, and also British-born Asian friends as well. And we had lots of discussions between the Christians and Hindus and Buddhists, and Muslims, Taoists, and people of no particular religion, but who were from non-Western cultures. I then went to study, after a year in China, I went to study in Singapore for Christian ministry in a college that was there to train Asian people for leadership in Asian churches. And I was the only Western student, which was a lot of fun. But except when they said, write this essay from your own Asian perspective. And then I'd have to pretend to be someone else this week. But it was a good experience. But for the last 20 years, my wife and I have dedicated our lives to trying to understand different cultures, how different cultures work. My wife is doing a PhD in the international student experience of Chinese students. And we do value discussions with people, and we're interested in finding out what other people think. But when it comes to religion, I became a Christian when I was 17, having been an atheist. But when I went to university, I had an experience that wasn't so good. There was another student from another religion I won't say which one, that doesn't matter. But he asked me to come to his room to discuss religion. I thought that would be great. So I went to his room, I brought my Bible with me, and I thought we would just have a good discussion. And when I got to the room, I recognized that I had made a mistake. I had gone on my own. He had brought a friend. The second mistake was I sat down. He remained standing, and he was a big guy, and I was a bit scared. He took my Bible off me. He didn't discuss his religion at all. All he did was completely destroy mine. And after an hour of that, I left shaking. And one of my Christian friends said to me, "How did you get on with that guy you said you were going to meet?" I said, "I don't know what I believe anymore. I just know I don't want to follow his religion." And I think that's sometimes what people experience in these sort of debates about different religions, that we can sometimes be so keen to tell others what we think, we forget to listen. Actually, I think we need to swap the microphones over. Sorry, having problems with the microphone earlier, and it's cutting in and out. But if that has been your experience of Christians, all I can do is apologize and say that Jesus would not have acted like that. So tonight's question is, how is Christianity any different to other religions? And there are all sorts of different ways to ask this question. Maybe, do all religions lead to God? But I have to say, I'm slightly uncomfortable with the word religion. There's nothing bad with the word religion. Religion is a good word. But when someone says, "Oh, Peter, you go and you give talks around different universities and you lead a church, you must be very religious," I feel a bit uncomfortable because it doesn't really describe my experience of being a Christian. You see, to me, being a Christian is not so much a religion as a relationship. Now, when I was young, my parents brought me up to go to a church, and we went to church most weeks, and we would do what the pastor said. He got us to stand up, and then he would say something, and then we sat down, and he prayed something, and then we'd sing these really old, boring songs, and then he would say something, I don't know what he would say, and then we would have him sing another song, drink some coffee, go home, and then Jesus and God were not mentioned for the rest of the week. It was just a very traditional sort of setup. So I gave up on it all. I said, I don't believe in God, and as a science student, I just thought, well, I don't need anything other than science. I became an atheist. But it felt very empty. And then when I was 17, I met some lively Christians who were very different from the sort of Christians I'd grown up with. They had a lively, living faith. And I thought they were lovely, but slightly nuts. I thought they were quite crazy. I thought how can you possibly believe this stuff? And I had some really good discussions where I thought I won the argument, but then actually I thought that they still had something that I didn't have. And then one night I was in my bed and I was looking up into the darkness, and suddenly the universe seemed a very empty, meaningless place. And I thought, gosh, if I am right and if my Christian friends are wrong, then this universe is empty and meaningless and my life is meaningless, and I cannot bear to live in a meaningless world. And I wept. And a few weeks later, I found, to my amazement, that Jesus Christ is real, and I met God for the first time. Now, there's something else happened around that time that sort of underlined or emphasized this experience. And one night, now, as a new Christian, I was starting to pray, and I was talking to God, calling him Lord. That's a very common word that Christians use for God. But I really felt an inner voice stopping me. No, I want you to call me Father. I thought, I can't do that. That's too informal. So I carried on talking to God, calling him Lord, which means king or master. But again, the voice came quite strongly. No, I want you to call me Father. Now, this is very important, Because we could talk all day about which religion is better than what religion, but actually it's not about religions or sets of beliefs, it's about a relationship. I don't want to criticize your religion, but I want us to cut to what is really important. Do we know about God, or do we know God? Do we know about God, or do we really know him? Now, my wife and I were leading a Bible study in our home for students who are investigating Christianity, and we were discussing the name of God and how the name God has been translated into different languages. And a girl from China said that in ancient China, God was often called Shangdi. Shang means above, and Di is part of the word for emperor. The emperor above all. And she went on to explain that in ancient China, the emperor was a distant and mysterious person. So the emperor above all, Shangdi, was even more distant and even more mysterious. And I smiled when I heard her say those words, because for 4 years we worked in a Chinese church, and we would often hear Christians pray, 上帝我们的天父, which means the emperor above all, who is our heavenly Father. You see, when Jesus taught us to pray, he gave us a pattern. And that pattern starts with the words, our Father who is in heaven. And the word he used is the word Abba, which is a bit like daddy, but a little bit more respectful. Very intimate, very personal. Another Bible study that we were involved in, we were talking about prayer. And a Japanese student said to us, I do pray to God, but I just don't know who he is. And that made me think that actually there are millions and millions of people in the world, many of them religious people, earnest people, who pray to God, but just don't quite know who he is. Do you know God as Father? Do you know that it's possible to know God as Father? Now, another thing that Jesus said on the night before that he was taken and killed, he knew this was going to happen, but he spoke to his friends to reassure them. And he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I'll say that again. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. That's quite a claim, isn't it? Now, he could have said, no one comes to God except through me. And he meant that. But he meant something much more specific. He said, if you want to know God as Father, there is only one way. And that may sound arrogant, but it's no more arrogant than me saying, do you know that I know my wife better than you do? That's not arrogant, it's just the truth. Because I have a relationship with her. Now, if you want me to introduce you to her, I will. But I would be fairly certain that I know my wife better than you do. You see, the way to God, it's not a religion. It's not a set of rules or moral guidelines, or rituals, or even beliefs. The way to God is through a person, his Son, Jesus. But what about other religions? Well, as Christians, we want to treat all religions with respect, in the same way that we would treat anyone who has a different opinion, who we might disagree with, but we can still respect the person for having that opinion. Jesus was able to look into people's hearts and see that there is often a good mix of good intentions and wrong thinking. But he always treated people with kindness and respect. And over the 20 years I've listened and talked to many people of many different religious backgrounds. And I've seen committed and earnest people from different religions. I've seen how they try earnestly to follow their moral code. They are faithful to their religious community. And because I believe God made all of us He's given all of us that hunger for truth, that ability to ask questions, and that ability to understand that there is right and there is wrong. Let me ask you again. Do you know God, or do you just know about him? Has anyone seen the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II? Anybody met her? Anybody met the Queen? Oh, one person. Anybody seen her on television? Yes, must be far. Anybody spoken to? Did you speak to her? No. Okay. I've seen the Queen 3 times. Once when I was so small I don't really remember. Once when I was about 10 on a holiday in London. And once a few years ago when I saw a big crowd in Oxford and I asked somebody what was happening. They said, the Queen is coming. I turned and there she was. Well, I only saw a hat actually, but I assumed that underneath the hat was the Queen. I love the Queen. I do. I read a lot about her. I respect her a lot. She's a committed Christian. I've watched television programs about her. But I don't know her. I don't know her. You know, if I was to have a conversation with Prince Charles, now, you have to use your imagination. I don't know Prince Charles. But imagine that I did, and we were having a conversation about the Queen. And I say, oh, yeah, I know the Queen. She's in her 90s now, and she's very committed to her work. She's quite a shy lady. I know that she likes dogs and horses. That's right, isn't it? And Prince Charles would say, well, those things are true, but that's just a little bit about her. There's much more to her than you have just described. You see, Prince Charles is not being arrogant. But the relationship that he has is very different from the relationship I have with her. But we are talking about the same person. In the same way that with different religions around the world, we are often referring to the same person, the God who made the universe. But the question is, do we know him or do we just know about him? The only person who can show us who the Father is the Son, Jesus. Now, one thing that many religions have in common, when we lived in Singapore, we were surrounded by temples and mosques and churches and so forth. And one of the things which is very common in many different religions is the idea of sacrifice. People sacrifice an animal, or maybe they give food or money, or they burn incense or make promises, or they do things that are quite harsh, or maybe fast from food, or go through certain rituals, with the intention or the hope that they will honor the God or gods that they worship, so that the God will listen to them, will answer their prayer, and maybe stop being angry and will protect them. You see, sometimes the idea of sacrifice is to close the gap between us and God. But Christianity teaches that there is only one sacrifice that can do that. There is only one sacrifice that is necessary or possible that can close the gap between us and God, that makes God a mystery, a stranger no longer. And that is not a sacrifice that you can make, because it's a sacrifice that has already been made. It is the sacrifice of Jesus himself on the cross. You see, Jesus was loved when popular with many people, but many of the religious leaders were jealous of him and so plotted to get him arrested on false charges and executed. And Jesus knew this would happen, and he didn't do anything to avoid it, because he knew that his death on the cross would be the sacrifice, the perfect sacrifice that closes the gap between us and God. Now, how exactly does that work? Well, let me tell you a story. How many of you have, well, maybe you don't put your hand up, but I know that many of you have got a student debt. Yes, probably. Well, I used to be in terrible debt. I was 9. I went down to the nearby woods with my friends and was playing with, one of them had a big kind of army truck toy. And I liked it so much, my friend said, I'll sell it to you for £5. I said, I don't have the money. He said, never mind, you can pay me back. And I thought, great, I can get toys on credit. And then I went to another friend's house, and I saw something that he liked. Remember, I was only 8 or 9, and he said, I said, I really like that, but can I have that? I'll buy it off you for £5. And it happened 3 times in 2 weeks. My wife thinks I was a very strange child. But at the end of the time, I realized that I was in debt by £15. Now, I could get money by washing my dad's car 50 pence a time. So I suddenly realized that I was completely stuck. I had no way out. Then Mum found out. Mums have an ability to know these things, and she said, Peter, gosh, how much do you owe? And I said, £15, £5 to each of these 3 boys. She said, right, get in the car. So I got in the car, and she drove me to each of these 3 boys' houses, and she made me stay in the car, and then she got out and she paid the £5 back in each case. I later discovered that £15 was her total money that she would spend on herself for a month after all the bills were paid. And then she got back into the car and said, Peter, doesn't it feel horrible to be in debt? And I said, yes, Mum, it does. She said, I have paid your debt. Now don't do that again. And I felt free. I felt completely free. And I knew that Mum didn't want me to pay her back. What she was doing was setting me free. And what she wanted was a change of life. And she got it. You see, I made 3 stupid mistakes. And it cost me more than I could possibly pay back. But Mum's love paid the price for me to set me free to live again, to try again. You see, what Jesus has done on the cross is not say, this is how you should live, and you're stuffed if you fail. He says, come to me, and through the cross I will pay your debt. So the distance between you and God can go to nothing. You can become his son or his daughter. He will be your father. And he says, learn from me a different way of life. And so that, in a nutshell, is really what I think Christianity is different from other religions. I think other religions ask wonderful questions. But I do believe that it is Jesus is the only one who can truly answer them. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Peter. So after this, you guys can just pick up discussion if you have any questions about what Peter has talked about with the people at your table. And after a short while, I'll come back on stage and just wrap up the event. So please go ahead if you have any questions. You can also direct them to Peter if you have any. Yeah, he'll be walking around answering people's questions.